All right, welcome everyone. I'm Laura Pilari, the head of business development here at Raise Green. And today's Raise Green webinar is environmental justice and community scale solar financing tips from a crowdfunding lawyer. This is the latest in our series of monthly webinars about the word out about important topics that affect the solar industry, the climate, and the communities that Raise Green hopes to serve with our democratized climate investing platform. Today, I'm joined by Franz Hochstrasser, the CEO and co-founder of Raise Green, and our very special guest, Elizabeth Carter, the founder and managing attorney of Elizabeth Carter Esquire LLC, who specializes in crowdfunding law and is on a mission to democratize business capital for Black, Brown, and low-income founders and community leaders. A little preview before I introduce Elizabeth more fully. Today, we'll be discussing the power of regulation crowdfunding in the fight for environmental justice, specifically how it can be a useful tool for community solar and similar projects. And Elizabeth will share from her incredible experience on how to raise money successfully with crowdfunding. We'll also shamelessly plug how Raise Green wants to support you, our listeners, with solar and climate projects in the communities you serve and lead. For example, if you're in the solar business and you want to grow your activity in nonprofit, C&I, or other community scale solar projects, you'll learn that financing projects with us gives you full control over your deal pipeline and project execution versus using only rigid traditional financing providers. So this benefits you and it benefits the communities that you want to serve. We definitely welcome your questions today. I want to encourage you to use the Q&A module at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. We'll address questions at the end. And you're free to use the chat anytime, but in fact, we'd love to hear from you where you're joining from today, but we'll be looking to the Q&A to screen the questions. Hop into the next slide. Just in case you're getting to know Raise Green for the first time, we make it easy to invest in climate solutions. So what does that mean? It means we make it easy for regular people to invest directly in solar projects that perhaps you develop so that you have at your fingertips a new source of financing that comes directly from impact investors, and you're not stuck relying on traditional financing routes. You should visit our website at raisegreen.com. You can click Get Funded, and that'll give you a way to get a really quick response from us to get a reaction to evaluate if your project is viable for financing. We have offered our innovative financing solution over the last year and a half, and we've really had some hugely successful companies raising funds through our platform. We give you access to an audience of about 60,000 potential investors. And this number is growing daily because, as everyone knows, the events of 2021 have spurred so many people to finally get serious about investing in solar and other climate solutions. So now, let's get into today's discussion. A little intro: clean energy access and a related area, housing affordability, are two areas where we know economic and environmental justice have just so much overlap, and where our two speakers today have a ton of combined experience. And so today we'll dig into some of the real world practicalities of how crowdfunding is an important tool for business and community leaders in both of these sectors. A lot of parallels. And this is a great way to answer the call basically to environmental justice and climate action. So with that, I'd like to bring on Franz and Elizabeth and formally introduce Elizabeth, our special guest. So Elizabeth, welcome. Elizabeth is the founder and the managing attorney of Elizabeth Carter Esquire LLC. She is a crowdfunding securities attorney who represents investment companies, small businesses, nonprofits, and co-ops, including housing cooperatives and other social enterprises with the legal strategy and compliance of raising capital from both accredited and non-accredited investors. Her most recent work includes assisting a driver-owned rideshare co-op with the legal compliance of its $2.5 million debt crowdfunding offer through Regulation Crowdfunding. And similarly, she assisted a number of cooperatives with their governing documents. So that means bylaws, operating agreements, formation documents, in order to prepare them for an upcoming capital raise as well, that allowed them to bring in non-member investors. She also assisted a number of investment funds with the securities legal strategy and compliance of an SEC Rule 506C crowdfunding offer, including a cooperatively owned investment fund that offered $2 million in equity to accredited investors, as well as a community development financial institution, or CDFI. Some of you may not be familiar with that term. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here today. And with that, Franz, I'll let you take it away.
Wonderful. Yeah, we're lucky to have you on, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for the great introduction, Laura. Way to frame up those topics, and welcome everybody. Happy New Year to you all. Elizabeth, I'd like to kind of get started with a picture. You know, everyone loves a good chart, and Laura's going to put up a picture of a groundswell chart, one of the leading nonprofits that's focused on creating energy accessibility. Groundswell measures the energy burden in low to moderate income communities. And the Department of Energy also cites LMI households face disproportionately high energy burden. Energy burden, to back up a second, is defined as the percentage of gross household income spent on energy costs. So in a low to moderate income household, national average is around 8.6%. That's compared to about a 3% average for a non-low income household. So what we're seeing here is that in many places across the country, it's exorbitantly worse than that. And around the world, we have a huge boom in green financing. For example, green bonds for renewable energy projects all around the world have topped $1 trillion now in 2020. And that's a citation from Newsweek. But these largely are brought by large financial institutions and used to underwrite utility scale solar and wind projects. Meanwhile, at Raised Green, we know that small and medium projects and community scale projects that benefit lower and moderate income consumers more directly are not getting financed nearly as readily. And there's a real opportunity for thousands of these clean energy infrastructure projects to be built and gigawatts of rooftop and community solar projects to get deployed into low to moderate income communities and lower their energy burden. As a result, so you'll see that this figure produced by Groundswell in 2021 touches on that problem. And likewise, since the beginning of our country's history, the financial industry has been biased against entrepreneurs, businesses, and projects that are led by Black, brown, and low-income founders and community leaders. They disproportionately do not get venture investment or traditional financing as well. So Elizabeth, you are an expert on how these kinds of organizations can stop waiting for traditional institutions to figure it out and instead directly enrich their own communities with inclusive and regenerative financing approaches. We're excited to hear from you today. So let me ask you a first question here to kick us off. Why is Reg CF simpler than getting a bank loan? And how can it democratize access to capital for communities and businesses and facilitate economic and environmental justice?
Thank you, Franz, and thank you, Laura, for the lovely introduction. And before, I would like to know who's in the audience before we jump to that question. I definitely want to answer that and can't wait to answer that. I'm just curious because I know we're talking about solar energy, community-owned solar, co-ops, regenerative finance. I'm just curious to know in housing development, who's in the audience, if you all don't mind, maybe putting in the chat, your experience with crowdfunding or what industry you're coming from, or your knowledge, if you have any of crowdfunding or solar.
Great idea. And always good to get engagement from folks. So I see some familiar names on the list, but anyone who wants to share some additional detail on their background, please go ahead in the chat.
Yeah. So as we're seeing who's in the audience, to answer your question, well, one, I mean, just what you stated earlier about the bias against, Black, brown, and low-income founders and industry leaders when it comes to traditional financing. So that really is my motivation for why I became and started to really focus my practice on crowdfunding or securities law. particularly crowdfunding, because crowdfunding is more democratizing in that way, and that unlike in the past, before crowdfunding, the Jobs Act of 2012 was passed, it still was sort of a game, sort of raising capital is still sort of a game for the elite, those who have connections. And so to me, and not just to me, but just what the industry is, with Reg CF, which is Regulation Crowdfunding, or Reg CF for short, is one exemption under the crowdfunding law, or the Jobs Act. And it allows for small businesses, or nonprofits, or even co-ops to raise capital from both accredited investors, which are defined as individuals, in this case, individuals that own more than $1 million, have more than $1 million in net worth, excluding their home, or more than $200,000 a year income. And then non-accredited investors as well, which you can imagine, again, before 2012, which is the Jobs Act or the Crowdfunding Act, most of these deals were reserved for those accredited investors. And that's really about 10% of the US population. So most people just didn't have access to whether the capital or the investment opportunities, right? And so why this is simpler. So again, going back to this, to historically traditional sort of disadvantage when it comes to Black, brown, and low-income business owners, is that the bank loan has their own rubric and their own, banks have their own tests, right, for what is credit worthiness and what is, viable in their mind. And so, but a lot of it is based upon bias, right? And then also outside of that, when the bank offers you a loan, it's on their terms. They have their interest rates, their payback and maturity date, et cetera. So that really, you have little wiggle room to really negotiate there. And so with crowdfunding, what it does is, whether you're offering equity or debt, you're the one that's, or the issuer or the business owner is the one that's controlling the terms, is the one that says, well, we'll pay back at X amount of years. Here are the interest rates based on our calculations on what we could do, whether it's based on our revenues, projections, whatever, right? And that's that is, to me, the easier part of it, a more simpler way, but not only that, the more accessible way, so that it's really on your terms. It's not something that is, what we've seen with banks, even if they do provide loans to these disadvantaged communities, they're unfair terms, right? And so in this case, these are terms that are more fair to you. So yeah, and I think to your second question, how can it democratize access to, capital, but also facilitate economic and environmental justice? I think just that, right? When you're flipping the power dynamics to the community member, the community leader, the entrepreneur, it does shift that share of economic power and control, right? So, and with these investors, crowdfunding investors typically are people who want to support, right? They're the people. So unlike the bank who's looking to get, exuberant, amount of return, or they're looking to resell that loan to some other major investor, these are people that are really supporting your business model, really supporting the community that the business is deriving from, and are okay with sort of those terms, right? Are okay with the slower capital, or and again, these terms can be however, right, the business owner wants to form them, and however they feel that will attract the best investors. But it really does increase that access there for both the investor and the small business owner.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, setting your own terms as opposed to taking terms is such a powerful flipping of the script. So, and I am heartened to see a lot of folks posting in the chat here about their experience and background and work. Some really impressive folks on the call here with a great amount of experience developing solar in LMI communities, and working to do more of it. So one thing that we do get a good amount of here at Raise Green is incoming from long tail developers, folks that are doing a couple projects here and there, and looking for access to capital that, like you said, they've historically been unable to get, or simply, their project is of marginal potential profitability, or is kind of on the edge, depending on what state it's in, and what offtake arrangement they have. And so at Raise Green, we seek to provide templates for folks to use template project finance document sets, things like site lease letters of intent, power purchase agreement, initial formation documents, company operating agreement, and also the investment documents, subscription agreements of debt or equity, as well as working with them to formulate their Form Cs. And so we have solar developers coming to us. We have EPCs that are looking to get from from the installation business into the owner and operator business. And Elizabeth, we like to kind of think of this as a bit of a match made in heaven, in that your experience coming at this from a structuring standpoint really I think could be a great complement to those folks. So how can you help a business like that? Can you work with companies and organizations to take legal templates and apply them in given situations?
Yeah, definitely. And I like that you put the match made in heaven, because crowdfunding is definitely, since, again, the Jobs Act of 2012, a tool to further democratize access to capital as well as investment opportunities. But what I've seen is that, particularly with crowdfunding platforms that are like Raise Green, but unlike Raise Green, because Raise Green knows better, is that it's very, the industry tends to trivialize crowdfunding as a gamified sort of way of raising capital. And what's amiss is that this is a true security, a true legal tool that has implications that could lead to, heavy fines, even criminal penalties, if not done right? So a lot of the SEC, when they're carping down on businesses raising capital, it has something to do with misrepresentation or fraud. Fraud is something that's intentional, but misrepresentation is something that you just fail to disclose a very important fact about your business or the offer, which a lot of the templates, or if the business is relying on the platform to provide sort of the template Form C, which is a disclosure document, or the template subscription agreement, which is basically the binding contract to say that you're going to invest this amount of money into the business. If you just leave it at just the template, it could be insufficient, and again, can lead to trouble down a line for the business owner raising capital. And so this match between the platform providing the template is great, because what it does is it's in line with the democratizing aspect of crowdfunding, but it doesn't stop there. The legal expertise and a legal review is definitely needed to make sure that the documents, the investment documents, which again includes the subscription agreement, a term sheet, sometimes the Form C, are tailored to that particular business. I should say a note to the Form C, which all security offerings, all investment offerings, whether equity or debt, you have to put forth with an offering document. In this case, Regulation Crowdfunding is called a Form C. And in that offering document, one of the big chunk of information, or the major or most important element, I should say, is the risk factors. And risk factors is basically disclosing to these potential investors of what makes your particular offer risky. Not the fact that all investment is risky, we know that, that's too general. But what about your particular specific solar project? And how is that risky? In other words, where is it located? Is it particularly in the market in, I don't know, New York versus Massachusetts makes it different or makes it less profitable? Or again, the pandemic, what happens if something like that happens again? Like, all these different factors needs to be described and laid out in sort of this paragraph form that's easily digestible by the investor, so that they understand what they're getting themselves into. So it's great that to have templates, but you definitely need someone to come in and really work with you to make it unique and particular to your, not only your offer, but your business, and then your potential and future projections as well. So yes, I think, again, I think this is married between the two. Don't trivialize it so much where, these other platforms, these other people in the industry will say, oh, you don't need a lawyer. Just use this. We drafted this note, it's this new contract that we're calling, I don't know, a safe note, and you don't need a lawyer. It's like, but you're offering $1 million and you don't need anyone to review it, which can have, again, major implications. You do need a lawyer. So you don't want that extreme, but you also want it open enough so that people feel comfortable and they don't have to guess what kind of contracts they need. The platform is there to provide the basic, and then the lawyer comes in and review and change it however it fits the particular needs of the owner, the entrepreneur.
Absolutely, and that's a good reminder for us to remind folks on the call that we, as the platform, don't provide legal, financial, or tax or accounting advice. However, Elizabeth can provide legal advice to you. So that's the match. So Elizabeth, you're a very interesting kind of lawyer. You specialize in helping people define legal strategies and achieve their goals, often using crowdfunding as the financing piece. And you've helped folks raise millions of dollars. So let's talk a little bit about the keys to a successful capital raise. And can you share with us what have you seen and what are some of the most successful approaches and things you've seen clients do really well as they work to raise capital?
Yeah, good question, Franz. Well, first and foremost, I would say start as early as possible. You can even start pre-revenue, so long as your projections are as accurate as possible. And these are just projections. Literally, it's a guess, a great guesstimate, right? But an estimate that is based on something. So it's great to have revenues because it's easier to calculate that. But if you don't, what you do is you go off the industry, you go off what others have in the market have done, and why are you unique? What are you adding to it? You really have to do that exercise. So it's great to have a business plan, even if it's not elaborate. You just need a vision and a plan of how you're going to generate revenues and how you're going to pay back your investors. That's first and foremost, and I think you should do it as early as possible. Why I say that is because of what I've seen is some issuers or businesses go out and raise capital first before seeking legal counsel, before seeking some financial advice, and they're doing it all wrong, which can lead them, again, having to restart. I have had a founder come to me and actually had to restart all over because the SEC, denied the Form C, which is something I haven't heard of before to this case. I'm like, wow, it must have really been bad, right? And you don't want that because now you're spending double than, or maybe triple amount in legal costs that you didn't have to, right? So definitely start from the beginning, have that lawyer that is experienced not only in business law, but securities. Securities is a particular unique subset of business law that focuses specifically on the security, state and federal regulatory requirements when raising capital from investors, right? You also will love the attorney to help you figure out the right structure. Sometimes, again, going back to the template situation, if you go through a regulation crowdfunding portal, they'll have the template articles of incorporation, for instance, and they may have a state that they prefer, like Delaware, which is something that a lot of people like to go and form, which is nothing wrong with, but it may not fit your needs, right? So the lawyer can talk to you about why Delaware over Texas, or why Delaware over Colorado or something, right? And then also if you have a unique sort of business model, like a co-op or a benefit corporation or some other social enterprise, there isn't really a template for that necessarily, right? Especially every state is different. You do want, there isn't a template that just works across the board. You'll need someone to come in and mend those documents that make sense for your membership structure, the way you want to be governed. And so for sure, I say that, again, starting early to have an attorney do that strategy with you. And then there's things that, for instance, when we talk about solar projects here, there's a strategy, right? Are you going to have the solar in a separate LLC versus the company that owns the LLC as a parent company, right? What does that look like? Or is the parent company itself or the company itself going to actually issue and create the offer and have this solar within this as a product, right? I mean, those are different ways to really structure your offer, but you would love to have someone that can legally do that and put it on paper for you. I could tell another story I've had where a client came after a little too late. And so we had to kind of clean it up for, they already had over $1 million committed of people who are interested in investing, but their articles of incorporation legally didn't allow them to receive that amount of investment. And what I mean by that is if you're a corporation, particularly, you have a certain amount of shares that are authorized, that the sort of pieces of the company that the corporation has, that you're able to then issue to others to kind of take a piece of that. But say if you incorporated, you only said, okay, we're authorized to issue 10,000 shares, but that $1 million equate 1 million shares, we have to go back to the state and actually amend it and make sure that you are allowed to and amend it so that you can receive that $1 million. And if you've already received money, now we have to even go even further and we have to get a permission from those investors, right? It could take longer. Maybe they're not okay with their investment being diluted. So now you have some trouble there. So we do want to start as early as possible. But outside of that, I think you need a strong team. In addition to legal, you definitely need a strong marketing team. If you don't already have a strong online presence or just a strong community, whether a large mailing list, you want to have a team that can help you build that crowd. Crowdfunding is about really reaching out to your community, whether it's your actual community or your online community, whether it's your customers, potential customers, or partners, whoever that are then converted into investors. So you need that team to help you with that. The platform has their own, so I'm sure Raise Green has the folks that already invested on the platform. I've heard some founders say that some of their investors come from the platform. I have heard other founders say all of my investors were from my network. So, but all in all, you definitely do your legwork in bringing those investors to the platform so that they can, so you can, reach your goal quicker and actually realize that goal much faster. So, like I said, I think making sure your legal documents are A1 before you actually go out and make those, even the marketing, because what the lawyer would do is make sure you're not saying the wrong things that can inadvertently get you in trouble. And then you add on the marketing team to come up with a plan to bring in those investors. Yeah.
Those are some great lessons and tips. And for all things crowdfunding, I think, what we exist as a platform to do, and I think what you're hearing from Elizabeth as well, is, this shouldn't be scary. If you do it the right way from the start, in, getting your legal documents organized correctly, preparing your lists and your outreach in advance and getting ready for the raise, and then really drawing on the networks that you have, which we all have networks, and using those to help fuel the raise can make it very successful. How else can we help these businesses? You are, Elizabeth, very forward thinking and understanding a successful business needs the kind of whole ecosystem to wrap around professional services that are uniquely designed for underrepresented entrepreneurs, even like marketing and financial services. I also see we have a lot of folks developing community solar on the line as well, which has disaggregated or rather aggregated lists of energy off-takers. So that's a network as well that could be tapped into to not just benefit from reduced electricity costs, but also have an investment opportunity as part of a crowdfunding campaign. So drawing on those kinds of networks, I think, is really exciting. But where have you seen some of your clients where they need support? What are some examples of where they've found it? Any great partners you want to give a shout out to as well?
Yeah, no, very good point about the ecosystem. So especially where, we're talking about underserved, underrepresented communities, because the resources just aren't readily available. Whether we're talking about cost access, because it's too expensive to hire an attorney or too expensive to hire a marketer, or just who do I know? Like, I don't know anyone that is engaging in this type of work. And so part of my work as a Black woman in the space who understands the challenges with, particularly with, for instance, other Black women entrepreneurs and other marginalized entrepreneurs, is that we need sort of a go-to place that has that readily available. So what I decided to do was make sure that I built a community of support around the legal. So I could easily just say, oh, I do the legal, I look at your documents, and you go off and good luck, right? But for me, knowing that it's already a challenge to raise capital from a traditional standpoint or traditional financing, we don't want them to be deterred also from this more democratizing sort of aspect to raising capital. Because one thing I will say is, as democratizing as crowdfunding is, there's still barriers of entry, right? Part of that is, legal does cost, marketing does cost, an accountant. If you reach $1 million, over $1 million, you have to have a CPA to stamp your financials, right? And that cost. And so you see all these numbers start to add up and you're like, wow, I'm raising money. You want me to come up with $50,000 to start paying for the pre-cost? And so what I've done a lot of good work in my team is trying to figure out how do we, with all that, challenges, even with that, as democratized as it is, and the challenges still come forth, how do we overcome them? And part of that is building an ecosystem of support. So what I mean by that is, having someone that we can work with that will possibly give some maybe startup funding capital, early pre-seed capital, like a credit union, right? That are already representing and serving these communities, but just don't have the connection to crowdfunding, right? How do we build these two worlds? Or with the crowdfunding builders, right? How do we make sure that we have someone on the team that can actually build your crowd if you don't already have one or you don't know how to engage one? And so one of the partners I like to shout out is Crowdfund Better. Kathleen Minogue there. She does a really good job and have been around for a while in crowdfunding, even at the state level, where she's done a lot of work in California and helping to bridge that gap with the credit union and the crowdfunding and building that crowd and turning them into investors. And so, part of my work is making sure that once we do the legal, I can hand you off to other partners that will then help you become successful, or more likely than not to become successful. Again, not to just leave you, there to fend on your own, but actually, promote more success than not by having a team ready and prepared to support you. So yeah, I will say that to me is very important in crowdfunding, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions of crowdfunding. I think people see the success stories and they're like, oh, such and such raised $1 million in a couple of hours, but do not know that there was a lot of legwork, a lot of years put into that before that actually happened, right? A lot of times those are companies that already had, revenues, were already operating, already built a community, already had a mailing list. And so when they were ready to raise capital, they just basically put out a blast and say, hey, who want to invest? Well, we already support you. We're loyal customers. We want to invest, right? So if you don't already have that, you have to build that. So it's not impossible. It's just, I think we need to be realistic about what's happening and not to be misled with sort of the outliers or the success stories that actually put in a lot of work before we actually saw them in person on the platform, right? And so working with a team that understands that and can help you get there is is key to your success, not just your legal compliance, which is part of your success. I always say that because if you do it wrong, it's technically an unsuccessful offer, because anything can happen where you have to return all the monies or get fined or whatever. But for the most part, to get tangible success, definitely should have a team that understands some of the ins and outs of the offer, for sure, of the crowdfunding offering.
Right on. Some good, another set of good pearls of wisdom for how to approach and prepare for a raise, and folks to partner with. You shouted out Crowdfund Better, I heard.
Yeah.
We can circulate a link to them if it's helpful. We do want to spend a little bit of time taking Q&A from the audience. We have some super dedicated and impressive folks on the line. Does anyone have questions? I think you can put them into the Q&A module, and Laura is collecting those. So please do put any questions that you have in there. I did see one come up, which was, oh yeah, this was on marketing firms. Any Reg CF accounting firms, Elizabeth, that you might have. I'll say for our platform at Raise Green, we do have a number of enterprise partners that we can refer you to, including on the accounting front. So we're happy to make a reference. But Elizabeth, I don't know if you've worked with any Reg CF accounting firms.
None that I regularly work with, but that's actually something I'm also looking for. So, I'd love to, share that resource with you as well, because just like legal is very specialized. I do know of one or two that a lot of people use, but they're so busy because of that, not enough. So I will definitely, if you reach out to me, can reach out to other partners that have worked with really good accountants in that realm, because just again, you can have any other type of CPA, but if they're not familiar with the Reg CF rules, it can make the process longer or have to sort of make some amendments. So you definitely want to work with someone that has familiarity. So it's good that Raise Green has some partners for you to tap into as well.
Right on. Laura, any other questions that came through the module?
Yeah, one actually just came through here from Carlin Hines. Thank you. Crowdfunding versus investors, benefits versus cons. Carlin, I might ask for a little clarification on this one. I think you're asking pros and cons of taking investment via crowdfunding versus perhaps other types of investors or other investor routes.
What was the actual question?
Crowdfunding versus investors, benefits versus cons. Carlin, feel free to, I don't know, in the chat or in the Q&A.
Yeah, if I might, I think perhaps what Carlin's getting at is benefits and or pros and cons of using Regulation CF versus using another type of private securities offerings, Reg D, for example, to raise from just accredited investors.
I see.
Yeah, I think that's right. Now we're hearing crowd versus traditional investors. So yeah, I think you're on the right track.
Oh, okay. Okay. And under the Securities Act, there are a number of exemptions that a founder or entrepreneur can utilize to raise capital. And then there aren't exemptions. So in other words, exemptions from having to register with the SEC and having to provide annual reporting, semi-annual, quarterly, those can really get cost over the life of the company. So those can get costly legal-wise, accounting-wise, and they are normally reserved for publicly traded companies because they have the money to spend hundreds of thousands per year on just the compliance alone, right? So if you can get an exemption, it's very desirable. So definitely try, and these are for private offerings. So if you don't want to have to report, you want to find an exemption. Then there's underneath those exemptions, there's crowdfunding exemptions, and regulation crowdfunding is one, and there may be two others that fall outside of crowdfunding that existed before the Jobs Act. But for the most part, most of them are crowdfunding exemptions. And so when you say traditional investors like accredited, well, you have 506C. Laura mentioned that earlier. I represent an investment company that received and were targeting accredited investors through a crowdfunding exemptions called Rule 506C, but it's only for accredited. So it's still crowdfunding in that you can do public advertising, but you can't, but it was only reserved for accredited. In that case, I think the difference between focus solely on accredited versus accredited and non-accredited is how do you bring them in. So even though 506C allows you to publicly advertise, which means you can have them come through your website, you can do phone calls, you can do cold emails, you don't have to know them. It's really the relationship piece. Whereas in the past, you have to have a relationship, know these investors and before they give you money. In this case, you don't. I think the value is just who's in your network and how fast you want to raise the money, and how many investors do you want to be able to have on your cap table, right? So we have non-accredited investors. More likely, you're going to have many more investors because of smaller buy-in, so to speak. Whereas the accredited investors usually are larger buy-ins, at least $10,000 per investor. So I really think it just depends on who you think you can pull in. If you think you can pull in more accredited, 506C may be a good route. And then also some of the benefits to 506C is that you don't have to go through a portal. You don't have to, it could be a little less costly because the compliance is different because SEC seems that, or deems accredited investors not as necessary to protect them, so to speak, right? So the difference of disclosures is different. Even though when I do them, I still lay out those risk factors. Those are the bare minimum, because what you don't want is any kind of claim of fraud or misrepresentation. But yeah, I think it just depends on who you think your network, who is your network, and who do you think is going to be the most to contribute. I think it helps you determine, the type of exemption, and then also how much money, right? Because Reg CF does have a cap of 5 million, but if you want to limit it, a 506C or Reg D makes sense. But I should also say this: Reg D is 3 different exemptions, which is not talked about a lot. Reg D is 506C, which is for accredited investors only, and that's unlimited. A lot of investment companies, including VC firms, use that one. And then you have Rule 504, which is up to 10 million, but there's state compliance, so that can add to your cost in addition to the federal compliance. And then there's Rule 506, Rule 506B, but that is more private. So I think you have to consider the cost, consider your investor base, and then how much money you want to raise in 1 year.
Awesome. Great set of things to consider. Any other questions that came through, Laura?
Yeah, one other one. Actually, wow, a handful now. This is
how it always works.
Yeah, it's wonder they come flooding in. It's great. Thank you all for the questions. I think this one's probably for you, Franz. Legal logistical distinction between crowdfunding and community solar subscriptions. Good clarification to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of what I have referred to in the past as a bit of a holy grail for us and from our standpoint of inclusive finance to make community scale projects happen. So community solar is a specific designation that about 18 states now legally allow, and several other states don't allow. And that involves a group of purchasers of the electricity that are pooled together or aggregated together into subscribers, a group of subscribers that are all buying electricity from one solar project. And crowdfunding is kind of the other side of the line there in who owns the solar project that's selling the electricity to those subscribers. So in a crowdfunded community solar project could have, hundreds of owners of the asset, and then also hundreds of subscribers to the asset. So in a way, if you are an investor who's also subscribed to the asset, you could have a circularity of your own capital where you're paying yourself for your own solar that you also own and generate. So that's a kind of beautiful vision of how that can come together, but hopefully that clarifies the distinction.
Great, thank you, Franz. One more here. How are we doing that? Yeah, I think we're good. So Elizabeth, you mentioned the importance of getting legal help early to avoid other fees or other issues. What is the right time to reach out? Is it after the business plan is fully formed, or are there benefits to reaching out earlier to ensure there are no fatal flaws in your idea? This is from Makeda Marshall and May Smith. Thank you, Makeda.
Really good question. I always say definitely take a stab at your business plan first. Work, really get, because as a lawyer, I'm not a co-founder, so I don't want to impose any of my own ideas, right? I want to make sure that your project, and this is something too I think is very important, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs that are newer or are looking to raise this amount of capital. Traditionally, if you go to a professional investor or a VC and you don't have what you want, they will tell you what you want. And so then it comes to, they sort of have this control. And if you want to really raise on your own terms, you want to make sure that you go in, with heart, what you want, right? What you want, you thought it out, what makes more sense for your business, your community, your members, your investors, right? What I do though, I can help you flesh out a lot of those things, but I still won't provide any judgment on, for instance, how much money you should raise, or what is the rate of return, and interest rate, or what is I won't do that. I will help you get there. But so it's best that you come prepared, because that also saves costs too and time, because you already have it laid out for me. And all I'm doing is converting that into a term sheet, or converting that information, the business plan, to the description agreement or the Form C. So it sort of already provides some guidance. What I found though is that even when it's already prepared, we're going to have to sort of tweak it a lot anyway, to make it specific for the offer. But the more information you have for me as the lawyer, the better for you, so that we're not pulling it out of you and having to spend that time. Instead, you're telling me, I want this, this, and that. The question I'll probably have for you is, well, where did you get this basis for this interest rate? And then you'll say, oh, well, according to these projections of, the revenue stream, blah, 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 I'll help you get to that narrow and that foundation. But you definitely should come when you have a strong plan of a marketing plan, a plan. How are you going to bring in revenues? Are you going to pay back your investors through revenues or profits? And what does that look like? And really just have that there. But again, even if you don't have it full, because a lot of this, especially if you don't have any revenue, you're still doing a lot of strong projections. We can help you get there. But I think the more information you have, the better it is for the legal to help you make sure you're compliant.
Great, thank you. Oh,
Right on. Laura,
yeah.
I see. Yeah, go ahead.
I think we have time for one more, probably.
I think I saw regarding investors from Crystal. Is that Crystal? Yeah, Crystal is a Luali. About investors. Do I have any advice for investors who are interested in investing in Reg CF. That's interesting. So I don't represent investors unless they're an investment company, but they're kind of the entrepreneur at the same time. But what I will say is this, regulation crowdfunding and as well as Reg A, they have caps on how much a non-accredited investor can invest. Particularly regulation crowdfunding Reg CF, say for instance, if you're a non-accredited investor, the cap is 2,200 or 10% of your income or net worth. Well, I should say this. If you make under 100K, it's 2,200 capped, right? How much you can invest in one platform or across all the platforms or portal. So that to me, I mean, there's talks about changing that because I really do think that it does, how can I put it? So back up a bit. When people talk about crowdfunding, they talk about it in two different perspectives, from the business perspective and the investor perspective, and why it's so great. Sometimes when they're pulling in investors or when the industry is talking about it, they're saying, oh, well, it increases generational wealth. It helps individual investors become wealthy. But when you really look at the caps, it kind of does that a disservice. So what needs to be done is more of a communication around wealth when it comes to investors. And to me, when it comes to crowdfunding investing, it's more community wealth, right? It's more, as Franz described, this community solar project where you're a subscriber and you have control and ownership and can receive more economic benefits of by virtue of your use of your energy, right? Versus someone who's on the, looking for the best deals on the stock market and you're looking to get all these returns, then that's a separate kind of conversation than the community or the crowdfunding individual wealth. However, I think it needs to be changed so that people have more flexibility now that it's getting more popular. Non-accredited investors should be able to spend more money if they want across these different businesses to be able to invest. So I think not less of advice and more of awareness that A, non-accredited investors are capped. B, this idea of individual wealth may not be as the same type of understanding as you hear when it comes to stock market wealth. It's more of a community wealth. And I think too, just looking at the third will be when you're looking at these deals, making sure you are paying attention to the risk factors, what's described in the Form C, what happens if this isn't successful? Are you okay with that, right? Are you okay with all your money, amounting to zero? But also looking at what is the likelihood that you will receive a return, making sure that those numbers and projections make sense. This is why I tell my clients that you can always put in on your offering disclosure. You don't have to put a number at all. You can just say, upon my discretion, we'll provide X amount of dividends or we'll provide dividends. But if you want to track the investors that want to know exactly where their money is going, how, you do want to do that exercise to kind of give some type of number, even if it's not guaranteed, so that you as an investor can do your own analysis to make sure that this is the best deal. So I would say look for those that actually have some type of projection, some type of number, so that you can better understand how your money is being used, and less of those deals that just has sort of this open-ended up to the founder, because then it's more riskier, I think, for you. You don't know what's happening with your offer, right, or your investment. You don't know how you're going to get that return. So I would say that make sure that when you're looking at it, it really tells a story of how these returns will be given back to you, whether in their plans or their sort of presentation on the platform.
Awesome. Yeah. And we had, there are three other questions. One of them I'm going to encourage, well, actually, two of them I'm going to encourage folks to reach directly out to you, Elizabeth, because I think they're somewhat project specific. One asking for an example of community solar projects that you may have worked on or heard about or supported in your work to help structure. And then another also about, is it better to raise funds for both the vertical construction for low-income housing projects alongside the solar project? So on both of those, I'm going to suggest folks reach directly out to you. We've got your information shared here, and hopefully it's clear to folks how they can reach you. We'll give a shameless plug at the end, but last question here, perhaps that we could entertain together is, how will investors look at an insurance wrap, which would guarantee income payment streams based on energy production? So in other words, are there ways that as a prospective issuer of securities through Reg CF, they can wrap an insurance product around guaranteeing payments for crowd investors? Bit of a tricky one, but
yeah, that's interesting. Wait, so kind of explain that, break that. I have it in my head, but you're saying because you don't want to guarantee because you don't know how these things are going to play out. You're saying have some type of insurance. Well, however, so if the company, for instance, I don't know, bellies up, some type of insurance plan that regardless that the investors get paid back. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's what John's getting at here.
I would say the best way for that to happen maybe is a debt offering, because debt is like, unlike equity, obviously, equity is, you're in it for the long haul, you're part of the company, goes bankrupt, there's nothing to really give you, right? But the debt portion of it is more, I shouldn't say more guaranteed, because, especially with crowdfunding, typically the terms are set up where the priority, you can set up where they are the first priority, but oftentimes a bank will have, if they have bank financing, they'll have the first priority. So you have to go through that line. And if there's money left, you finally get paid back at that point. So debt may be the one, or based off your revenues, right? Because that revenue stream is different from profits. The revenue was sort of, you're further up in the line of when the money can become distributed to the investors. And then being a debt holder versus an equity holder, you are paid first before the equity, right? So those are ways to kind of push the investors further up the line. Now, as far as an insurance company, or some type of insurance, I guess my question would be, A, who's doing the insuring or underwriting? And then B, where is that money coming from? And then is that an extra cost? This is interesting. I haven't thought about it, but will there be an extra cost to the company for that? Or is that some type of reserve system, right? Maybe that's something where we set up where a portion of the revenue is automatically put in this reserve account that constantly builds up for rainy days, such as, anything can happen, right? And that's something that's typically done even with housing projects and housing developments, right? Is that making sure that there's money for to pay the bills, right? I think there's ways to structure it, but that's what you're saying. I know you're asking. I haven't heard or seen anything like that. I think there's ways to use the tools that exist to get to where you're going. I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a very widely used tool in insurance, and John points this out, I think, in his last question, which you shot up as you were talking, that there's a solar production guarantee insurance policy that is fairly traditional and usually is a 2% fee on a monthly basis. So that's something interesting to look into, I think, John. So with that, we have only a few minutes left, and we want to be true to the timing here. It's an absolute distinct pleasure to have Elizabeth Carter on, amazingly well-versed Reg CF lawyer that can tackle all of the tricky problems and questions that we as a platform are not able to advise you on. So really wonderful to have you on, Elizabeth. I'd love to tell folks how they can reach you again. I know we dropped it in the chat, but over to you for a little bit of a promotion.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. No, and I want to just thank you all again for this lovely partnership, and looking forward to building with you all more as part of the ecosystem. I think crowdfunding definitely deserves ecosystem building, especially for, again, those underserved, underrepresented markets. So I just think this opportunity to just start this off this way and to educate and to bring awareness. But I would love for you all to reach out to me with any questions or comments or concerns that you have. You can reach out to me directly at ec@elcesq.com. But I also would love for you to sign up to our newsletter, which is www.elcesq.com/signup. And the reason being is that, the newsletter, one big part of the firm is to educate. And so we have a resource center, we have writings, blogs, we have articles, we have social media. We're constantly pushing out content to help further educate, and not only just educate, but to engage. And I think the newsletter will be helpful for you all to get to see this in real practice, right? What does it look like We're talking about it technically, but what does it look like when a founder actually raises capital? Who's raising capital? What are some of the industry trends, right? You'll get a lot of that. You'll get, some updates on some of our own clients and see what we've been able to do. So I think it'll be great for you to sign up for the newsletter, in addition to reaching out to me with questions. I will say one thing I want to clarify. I know I mentioned about the investor, and I think that was a great question about, what suggestions I provide or would like to add to for investors is that with regulation crowdfunding, I do want to add that if you make over 100K as a non-accredited investor, you can invest up to 10% of your income. So that does help, right, with some of that, the wealth building techniques. But I'd still want to clarify that, I think as part of advertising in this industry, there's a lot of misconceptions of what this is, or just sort of, embellishment a little bit. I think crowdfunding, we definitely need some amendments with the what do you call it, the policy, which is in the works. People are already advocating for these things to take away some of these restrictions for non-accredited investors. But either way, I think it's important to know what you can and cannot do as you're looking to invest in these solar projects, and who do you want to invest in. There are caps, but it depends, right? So I just want to throw that out there. And yeah, again, any other questions, and that's all we talk about on our blogs, we talk about in our other programming, just so you understand exactly what you're getting yourself into. Thank you. Thank you again, everybody. Happy New Year.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. So if you want to use Regulation CF to fund your next project, reach out to Elizabeth Carter, reach out to us at Raise Green, and you can work with both of us, hopefully have a very successful raise. Elizabeth is your go-to if you are just getting started on your legal strategy and business plans. If you have a project that's ready to fund, feel free to reach out to Laura Polari at Raise Green. It's just Laura at raisegreen.com, or go to our website and click Get Funded. Also, my email is here as well, Franz at raisegreen.com. You can reach out to me. But project-wise, go to Laura. Together, we want to promote and support your community scale solar visions and empower you to drive that progress in your local community and area. Would love to work with you all. And thank you so much for spending some time with us. Happy New Year. It should be a bright 2022. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.